Warm greetings, everyone. On behalf of W4W Foundation, a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective, we welcome you to another session of Wednesdays for Water. The conversation today is on women journalists on water matters. Before we get into the conversation, let me just briefly take you through what is Wednesdays for Water doing. The objective of Wednesdays for Water is to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policymakers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues around water and the possible solutions which the water enthusiasts are really seeking and working upon. It has expanded since then to have more activities like the Friday Waters and the Monday Munching with Women for Water, besides organizing on-site water workshops, water walks and talks, water seminars, special courses and conference panels to continue the water conversation in various possible ways. At W4W Foundation, we believe that water conversations are fundamental to water conservation. Do visit our website, www.w4w.in, for more details. My name is Mansi Bal Bhargav, and I am the moderator and host for the session from W4W. As we are discussing today's topic, which is more on women journalists on water matters, we will definitely discuss the water matter per se, but we would also like to know what it is to be women in this field of water, as well as especially looking at the journalism side of it. In today's session, we have Nidhi Jamwal, Rishika Pardikar, and Vaishnavi Rathore as our guest speakers. And before I invite them for a candid conversation, I would like to just give a brief introduction of each of these girls. Nidhi Jamwal is a Mumbai-based journalist who reports on environment, climate, and rural issues with over 25 years of experience in environmental and developmental journalism. And she has been acknowledged all over for various kinds of works. And I'm going to put her detailed bio in the chat box. And let me move on to Rishika Pardikar, who is a freelance environmental and climate reporter from Bangalore. And she's, by the way, a chartered accountant, but I guess she is really moved by all environmental aspects which are going around her life as well as her surrounding. Then we have Vaishnavi Rathore, a young environmental journalist, and she works as a climate and land reporter for scroll.in for over 2 years. And she has also written a lot in other portals, including the Bastion and other developmental journalism portals. So let me just write their bios in the chat box and invite each of these girls with an opening remark on what is their area of interest in environmental journalism, or maybe their forte, and how did they land up in environmental journalism, because it's not really something very common amongst major journalistic profession. I think we can start with Nidhi then. Nidhi, over to you, and thank you so much for joining, and congratulations for your recent awards.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mansi. And I think thank you so much for having three of us here together to speak about water issues, because strangely, a lot of times, when we attend panel discussions and all, it's mostly men speaking about water issues. So I'm so glad there are three women journalists who want to speak about this, and a moderator is also a woman. So Mansi, I mean, as far as being a journalist, environment journalist is concerned, it was never a very, very conscious decision, to be very honest. I never wanted to be a journalist. It just so happened that, I was put into a situation where I kind of reported 1 or 2 times, and that's how I turned a journalist, because I was actually working with Center for Science and Environment in Delhi, and my interest was always on research side. And I used to work with CSE, and CSE still brings about the state of environment reports. And I was working on those reports, and it just so happened that because Down to Earth is also published by CSE, and once or twice I just happened to write some stories for Down to Earth. And that's when I was offered that, why don't you join Down to Earth? And I still remember, I just said that, I don't want to be a journalist. I don't like journalists at all. But I think I was very fortunate that I got all my training of being an environment journalist with Down to Earth, because it gave me an opportunity to travel to different parts of the country, to look at environment beyond just trees and wildlife. And I think that's how I became an environment journalist. And as far as my interest areas is concerned, it's mostly I look at environment stories from people's perspective. I don't think I've really done any story around, say, wildlife per se and all, because for me, environment is somehow always in relation with people. So that's how almost all my stories in environment are through the lens of people. So
Thanks, Nidhi. And you also prove in that way that water management is people management, actually. Water need not be managed. So let me just move on to Rishika for the opening remarks. Rishika, over to you.
unmute yourself, Rishika. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, is it fine now? Yeah, it's really nice to be amid three other women and an all-women panel discussion. I think one of the first things that I noticed when I started ground reporting was women are in charge of fetching water, women are in charge of getting firewood. So both of the hardest tasks in a day, which are concerned with very basic necessities like water and firewood, are they come from the women of the household. And even I've noticed that when I speak to them, the story becomes something else entirely. So I did remember I did this report from Monga Bay. Okay, anyway, I'll get into that later. But yeah, I mean, women's perspective is really key on a lot of issues. So my interest in environment, yeah, it is much like Nidhi. I never really ventured out to be a journalist or to be an environmental journalist. By training, I'm a chartered accountant. I worked as a CA for a year and a half in a mid-sized CA firm here in Bangalore. Then I quit and I came into journalism. I tried writing some other issues also, like one or two maybe political reports and some other things. But then what actually held my interest for a very long time was only environment. So within the first 2 or 3 months itself, I realized, okay, environment is what I actually care about. That's what I want to cover, and that's what I've been doing for like 6 years now. It's been only environmental reporting, and full time it has been only as a freelancer. Yeah, this way of working, the freelance mode, it gives me a lot of freedom to do what I want to do, to pursue stories that I want to pursue. It has its challenges also, but it has been mostly exciting. So yeah, that's my journey.
Thank you, Rishika. And we are definitely going to take up the challenges towards the end of the conversation when we have heard your, journey and stories. Let me just move on to Vaishnavi for her opening remark. Vaishnavi Rathore, over to you.
Thank you, Mansi. I really like how all three of us are almost like accidental journalists, I think. Because even for me, it was, I'm not trained in mass media or journalism. I was interested in environment as a space, much like Nidhi was talking as a researcher. And I worked for about 2 years in that policy landscape. Where I was working in Gujarat on commons, like pastures, etc. And then for a year, I worked in Himachal Pradesh on the Forest Rights Act and its implementation in the state. So there, that's when like my interest really got into, because I had this urge in me to kind of want to write what I was seeing on ground. And that's when I started writing a little bit. So I had written about, I think, 1 or 2 articles back then, with Down to Earth, and I really enjoyed the whole process. And so it just so happened that around the same time that I wanted to leave, or was thinking about moving from Himachal, is when there was a role that was available with the Bastion, which Mansi was mentioning earlier, and they were looking for someone to cover environment in particular. So I got really excited because it seemed like a great combination of things that I wanted to do and what I felt by then a little confident of, because I was working on ground. And yeah, since then, it's just my environment and climate has been my beat now for the last 5 years. And so, but even in that, like, I think there are favorites in terms of themes that I like, specifically enjoy working on. So geographically, Himachal Pradesh is something that I kind of like keeping track of, just because I've had that association with it in the past. So everything that happens in that region, from disasters or stories on hydropower, large infrastructure like 4 lanes, all of that like kind of piques my interest. And beyond that, I get very excited when I get to do a story on how climate change is impacting different um, kind of aspects on ground. So, and yeah, so it just comes out in very interesting ways. Like I've done stories on how it's impacting something as basic as, say, food or salt that we use in our everyday life. And from there, like stories on how climate change and labor is connected. So all of that like really excites me. And I think by now I've understood that climate change is not just a beat in itself, but it's something that I think every beat kind of needs to, think of and incorporate in their stories. Yeah, so I'll stop there now.
Interesting. I mean, you use a very interesting word, beat, which I used to think that trending, and journalism also has something like trending. So let me just ask the second round of question to all of you. So what is really trending in water sector or water news or water journalism? You can just decide who wants to go first or later. Nidhi, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's trending right now is basically urban floods, I would say, considering what's happening in Bangalore.
Bangalore. Yes.
Discussing. The I think for me, two, three concerns. If I look at what are the trends or what are the major concerns in water sector, one is definitely this whole issue of too much water, too little water. Then that's like a huge concern. Also, second concern, I'm just speaking briefly, just highlighting some of the points, and maybe later we can discuss them. Second issue that I see is huge is also the quality of water issue. So what's happening right now is that everybody is talking of water as either water scarcity is there, water stress is there, but there is a huge issue of water quality in this country because you have so many districts which have water contaminated because of arsenic or fluoride or a cocktail of different contaminants. I think that's also a huge issue, but somehow that focus is still not there because right now focus is har ghar nal, and we just have to somehow take water everywhere. Third issue I think which is very important in water sector right now is climate change versus poor planning, poor infrastructure. So what is happening in all these conversation now is anything that goes wrong, all the blame is put on God's act. If Mumbai gets flooded, if you have landslides in Himachal because of heavy rainfall, the best thing for government or any other official, anybody is to say is it's a God's act, what can we do? But what's also happening is that we are hiding behind the whole issue of bad planning, bad infrastructure. So I think that's like a major challenge right now in water sector, that we cannot hide behind, climate change ho raha hai to hum kya kare. I think that's just like hiding all the bad work that we have done till now, and we continue to do despite seeing what's happening, around us. And I think third issue, which I would really want to say, is that in this whole water discourse, somewhere I feel rural India is missing. There was a time urban floods were not an issue. Somewhere around 2000, urban floods became a new phenomena. Now, if you see, like I've just coming back from Bihar, which was facing massive floods. One day rainfall in Bangalore is a news for everybody to cover. But you have millions of people in, say, Bihar who faced floods, very, very bad floods. The entire North Bihar was in underwater. But that's really not a really an important issue because now the entire focus of water, floods, and everything is so urban centric. So I think rural India is completely missing out on any coverage on water now because urban has become so big and so important. So these are, I think, some 3-4 points I think I would just like to highlight.
What is interesting is that you not only highlighted the trending part, but you also highlighted what we are missing in the journalism. So maybe Rishika and Vaishnavi, would you like to pick one aspect of it or add to what Nidhi was talking about and elaborate something from your own experience?
Yeah, so I'll definitely speak a little more on what's happening in Bangalore because I'm from here. But before that, one more point, one more thing that is trending now and which we really need to look out for is the Indian government's push for hydropower projects. So there is a big push coming, and this push is coming because of the need to build renewable energy capacity. So India, on an international forum, has promised to build up non-fossil energy. So non-fossil energy is solar, wind, obviously, but also hydropower. And I think the regions that will be most impacted by this are Western Ghats and the Himalaya. So for any good, profitable, effective hydropower, you need altitude. And this kind of altitude in India we have in the Himalayas and we have in Western Ghats. So I think, and these areas have a lot of people. These areas are biodiverse. These areas, especially the Himalaya, it's still geologically fragile. So I think this is one more aspect that we need to keep in mind, that where is the government's push for renewable energy going into which regions, and what kind of assessments are we really doing or not doing for this? Because if it comes from a push for climate change, it's difficult to build a resistance for it, even if there's a ground resistance, because the government will justify it saying, oh no, we are also doing this for environmental purposes only. You don't oppose this on environmental grounds. So that becomes a conflict, right? So until now we could say coal, oil, gas, these are very destructive, it's very bad, all that. But with hydropower, the government is co-opting the language of environmentalism, because the government is now saying, okay, this has no emissions, this is clean, this is good, so let's do it. But there are problems with that, because if you build large hydropower, uh, it can lead to, especially now in the climate change era, when the smallest of rainfalls lead to landslides in geologically fragile areas, a big hydropower will only exacerbate such risks. So we really need to keep this in mind, and also be wary of how the government is co-opting the language of environmentalism for large hydropower projects. But apart from that, just a brief thing about what's happening in Bangalore. I was born and brought up here. Like, I'm from Karnataka. So I think a lot of people don't know the history of Bangalore. So the idea of this very evil metropolitan city, not only for Bangalore, for Mumbai, for Delhi, this always comes up. But what we really need to keep in mind is that all of these cities have huge populations. So Bangalore, so we don't have a census now, but the estimate is like maybe 12 million people. Like, it's over 10 million definitely. And Bangalore is not all upper caste rich people. So Bangalore has a huge migrant population, a worker population. Bangalore has huge other populations also who are generally marginalized in society. So, and Bangalore administrators have to keep all of them in mind when they are planning, and that doesn't happen. That is the point of critique. So you can't only say, okay, Bangalore consumes so much water, because Bangalore consumes that much water because we have that many people. And you do, so if there are people living in a place, you have to keep in mind what their needs are. So the point of critique should be, is water going to the right people at the right time? So on water, I would critique Bangalore saying, okay, why are you only giving pipe water here to this area and not to that area? Because some areas even now are not efficiently connected with pipe water supply. But on what's happening now, so historically also, Bangalore had hundreds and hundreds of lakes. And these were all not natural lakes. These were constructed because to support agriculture. So Bangalore does not have a perennial source of water. It's a different landscape. So to ensure that there is good water supply for agriculture activities, the administrators at that time, they built many lakes. So anecdotally, we say that Bangalore is like a town of like 1,000 lakes. I don't know the exact number, but it's many hundreds of lakes. And over time, as the city kept growing, all layouts like residential layouts, the cricket stadiums, our biggest bus stand, Majestic bus stand, that came up all on areas that were previously lakes. So now what happens that all these areas, and most recently, this encroachment of lakes has happened because of real estate firms. And their names have, like Shobha, Prestige, I can name all of them. So their names are there in a report submitted to the Karnataka Legislative Assembly. They are listed by name, all the firms that have encroached lakes. No action was taken against them. This was in 2017. It has been so long now, and no action was taken against them. But anyway, even more broadly, even outside of real estate encroachment, the city has been built over many of these lakes, which either died or they just dried up. Like, seasonally they were there, seasonally they were not there. But for whatever reason, the city has been built up over these lakes. And now, whenever there is a little bit of flooding, the entire thing begins to look like a lake again. So Kendriya Bihar is one area now which has like a lot of feet of water. People are just wading through the water now, and that used to be a lake earlier. There are many other areas also which are like this. Uh, I think the point I would stress is we need sustainable cities. Like, no one would question the need for a sustainable city now. Uh, but the challenges are huge. And also, it's interestingly, the people whose houses usually get flooded, people who are in these low-lying areas, are again belong to the marginalized society, whether it is on caste, class, whatever it is. So it's a huge task. But but Bangalore right now, our BBM, so BBMP is our civic authority. BBMP right now has no elected officials. We've not had elections for many years now. Uh, so civil servants are just running the entire body. So there is no accountability also. So it's like a complete mess here in this city. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah.
So is it covered enough? That is another question. And but Bangalore is risen a lot, as Nidhi was already mentioning, that urban areas, especially like Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi, are covered heavily. So Vaishnavi, you just saw that how a Bangalore story really pops up in every now and then stories. I mean, in terms of journalism. And I know you have been covering a lot about climate change. What are your experience of covering climate change as a journalist? And
Hmm.
especially you can bring the northern side of the country into the discussion here now.
Yeah, it's very challenging. Like I was just looking at while I was preparing for today, I was looking at the work that I'd done in this year, and starting from April, I mean, issues of water and climate change, they were just so commonly that we were reporting on. April, we were writing on, the water crisis that there was water shortage in Bangalore. And we were talking about that. And then we moved to June, which is when, monsoons come in, and we are talking about floods in Himachal, and you go further up, in August, we were talking about floods in between Bangladesh, Tripura, all of that issue that was happening. So it's constantly challenging to be reporting on, aspects and impacts of climate, specifically when it comes to water. But also in that, I feel that often when we are talking about disasters, right, which is like one of there's a lot of research now which shows how there are a lot of extreme weather events that are happening which are connected with the change in climate. But the thing with that is that often media will report about that disaster when it happens, which is important, absolutely important to talk about the disaster when it's happened, how many people have been impacted, etc. But there's a lot of things that are happening in between those disasters, which have also contributed to the impacts of those disasters. So something that Rishika was saying earlier, right, that hydropower or building dams on the river basin is only going to worsen the impact of a flood when it happens. And this is something that we saw last October in Sikkim, when there was a glacial.
Yes, Tista. Mm.
Yes, when the glacial lake burst on Tista and it completely flooded, and the impacts downstream were much worse because there's a string of dams on the same river. So while the incident of the glacier lake bursting can be, attributed to climate change, but the impacts that it compounded downstream is not about the event itself, but what was happening between those events of disaster. So the building of the hydropower. Similarly, in Himachal, it's one thing that happens very commonly is that when there are large infrastructure being built, whether it's a dam or in a recent case, this was found for Atal Tunnel. The debris that is there or the muck that comes out from these projects are often kind of dumped in random places, which are not the sites for dumping, which initially have been agreed upon. So this happened in Himachal in July or August, I think, this year, when a village in Kullu district, they were flooded because the flood happened, but the river diverted its course because the debris of the Atal tunnel was kept there, like huge rocks and like stones that were kept there. Uh, and this is something that the administration in Himachal knows. The fact that the debris, worsened the floods is written in their site inspection report. So it's not that this is something that only locals have been talking about or researchers are pointing out. This is something that even the administration knows. Shimla High Court again and again has, pointed towards NHAI for dumping their muck and all of this debris on while they are building the roads, they're dumping it on riverbeds. So the High Court has come up and then they've actually pointed to them, asked them to take responsibility. So these are all these aspects of corporate interests, accountability, all of this, which also have to be taken into account when disasters are happening. Like these are events that can be connected with climate change, but on ground they're also worsening the impact in terms of lives that are being cost because of companies not being responsible for the damage. So yeah, I just wanted to say that it's important to kind of keep that in mind as journalists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You both remind me of my PhD time when I did come up with the whole finding that all dump, whether it is solid and liquid waste, gets into the water body, whether it is river, lakes, or ponds. And what is very interesting is that initially, during when urbanization began, we had no choice than to dump in the water bodies because they were easy targets. Half of the time they were empty, but then it became a modus operandi over time. And whenever I am talking about lakes, I say a lake lost is a land gained. And Bangalore example, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad has lost more than 500 lakes in less than 20 years of my own studies, master's to PhD. So just to give you an idea and wrap it up, but we have some interesting point which Namrata wants to add to this conversation. Before I invite Nidhi, maybe Namrata Kabra from chat box, would you please unmute yourself and speak? Thanks, Namrata. Go ahead.
Hi,
Add here.
thank you for inviting. But essentially, like what I've said, and I think all the speakers have also highlighted the key factor apart from extreme weather event, which of course is not in our control, but the exacerbation of impacts of all the disasters is core issue of infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure we are building and also promoting very rapidly. And that's where I wanted to point, apart from all the issues that's mentioned, the riverfront development projects that are being promoted in more than 100 plus cities from a model which is the Sabarmati riverfront, which itself has failed miserably. In fact, to the extent where there are many reports which says that, in fact, the Narmada water is flowing at the Sabarmati riverfront. So you imagine what is the kind of ecological damage we are looking at, and what these implications in the days to come is going to happen when 100 plus cities and rivers are going to be impacted in such a way. And at the same time, there is projects and early approvals, and I think the river Kane and Betwa interlinking is already in progress. So the kind of ecological change in landscape that you're going to look because of these infrastructure development, as also Rishika said, in the name, and co-opting the language of environmentalism is, I think, the biggest danger that we are seeing. Yeah.
Wonderful. Where are you based, Namrata? I want to give you a
Yeah.
big hug because I find a soul sister who wants to talk about riverfront. I have been screaming at my loudest voice here, sitting in Ahmedabad, and
Oh,
Sabarmati becoming a policy guideline for 100 more riverfronts during G20, by the way. That was the time when it came up. So, Nidhi, you saw these young journalists talking about the concerns not only about the natural disaster, but also some of the disasters which are humanly constructed. And often it is man-made disaster because in water sector, in decision-making sector, most of the time it is majority men who are sitting in the boardrooms and deciding the future of the cities. I'm sorry, but this is a kind of a rare situation when we have women panelists discussing, which I'm not a feminist and I don't do this intentionally. But then this is also a fact that it is a male dominated decisions, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is water. Where do you see we are heading with these kind of natural disasters rising, as well as we are not learning from our mistakes and we are continuously doing the same mistakes? But you had a positive discussion on Mumbai. So maybe you can compare what we are not learning and what we have learned.
Yeah, Mansi, so I think I will pick up from something what Vaishnavi was talking about, Sikkim glove. Something similar actually happened in February 2021. Also, if you remember, on 7th of
Yes.
February morning, there was an avalanche.
Yes.
Remember? And we saw all those visuals of water and everything just flowing down. And again, there were, I think, 3 hydropowers downstream. And it just destroyed all of it, carried all that debris and dumped it, and the destruction it caused. So the whole point definitely is that there is absolutely no accountability. Things are repeating year after year, and it's the same thing. You have Chamoli happening in 2021. In October 2023, you have the same thing repeating in Sikkim at such a large scale. And these are all somewhere very ecologically sensitive regions that we are talking about. I was speaking to somebody in Sikkim, and they were saying that a lot of bridges and roads which were destroyed during that October 2023 Glove have still not been constructed. So you can imagine, if these areas they get cut off, their roads are destroyed in Mumbai, Delhi, because these are big cities, you would get the road construction and the stuff done. But in other areas, people are just left like that for months. So I think there is absolutely zero accountability from the government side of Chamoli. I remember a lot of people had also died. Many of them were laborers who were working on these hydropower projects. Now, what has happened after that? I think that's where there is a problem with we in media also, as journalists, as me, or Vaishnavi or Rishika or everybody else, that we also keep jumping from a story to other. We do not revisit. I think now that we're talking of this, it suddenly strikes me that why should I not go back and check what has happened to that Chamoli 2021 disaster? What has happened to those families who lost their members? Government at that time says, oh, we formed this committee, that committee. What has the committee report says, all of that. So I think that's also the kind of work we as journalists really now need to do, because otherwise this will just keep happening. So that's about the thing. Now, riverfront thing also, I think somewhere we don't realize. I was speaking to somebody in Bihar, and he was pointing out how नदियों का अपना एक चरित्र होता है. And he also told me कि चरित्र को आप character मत बोलिएगा. So, it is like that sacrosanct. So rivers have their own character, if I can use that word. Unfortunately, all the planning and everything that's happening, and maybe that's because there are men who are planning, and men believe in this huge engineering, big solutions. You have to promote those big engineering solutions for even the tiniest of problem. So, which is why I think a lot of our water works is around this huge engineering marvels that we're going to create to solve the problem. Same is with rivers. We don't look at river as a living entity. It's almost like a nala. If I see Mumbai has some 5 rivers. Meethi River we got to know only when Mumbai got flooded in July 2005. But I live in Andheri. Right next to me is Oshiwara River, but it's a nala. Because what they have done, they have made boundary walls on both the sides, to the extent even the bed of that river has been cemented. So basically, we don't even realize what is a river and how a river is different from a drain. Unfortunately, most of our projects, whether it is riverfronts, they're all trying to make our rivers into some kind of a drains where you feel, oh, we will tell river how to flow. We will decide which river has excess water, which has less water. So let's bring excess water to less water. Some osmosis they are doing, what they think will happen, but it just makes zero sense. And we're watching it wherever things are happening. We can actually see that it's not really solving the problem. Where we are in 2024, water crisis, too less, too much is actually getting exacerbated. So I think we've really not understood what exactly the whole water concept and rivers and all that is, which is why the kind of solutions that are being promoted are really not working out, whether it is in the Himalayas or central India or the plateaus or wherever. So that is, I think I would leave it at there and maybe come back later.
Mansi, I just wanted to add one thing.
Yeah.
No, I was adding, another thing when Nidhi was talking about all of this, like as policymakers, of course, they have a certain view and everything that like Nidhi was talking about. I think it's so important to also incorporate how people are understanding some of these things, and how like Nidhi was saying, right? Like they have an understanding of what the characteristic of or character of the river is. And similarly, like in Lahore in Himachal, and I'd gone to report, it was almost a bizarre story, because the same place that I had reported from in Lahore in 1 year was facing droughts, and another year was facing flash floods. And when like we were talking about when I was talking to people about how do they know that this flash flood is happening because of, say, more rain? Is it like a monsoon related event, or there they were talking about glaciers kind of bursting. So I was like, but how do you know that it's either of these two things? And they were very confident when they were listing down the events. They were like, इस साल में जब हुआ था वो बारिश की वजह से हुआ था, बट इस साल में जब हुआ था तब वो ग्लेशियर फटा था. So kind of just wanting to understand how they really know this, because glaciers are not easily accessible, right? But something so simple, like they were just like, जिस दिन जब जब पिछली बार जब ये नाला पूरा ओवरफ्लो हुआ था उस टाइम पे बारिश नहीं हो रही थी. It was absolutely sunny, but this overflew, and like there's no other reason for it other than like a glacier perhaps like on the top bursting. And I think all of these things that we learn from ground, like as some, like I think all of us have done ground reporting, we would know that there's so much value that comes from the knowledge and wisdom that people living there very close to these places have. And it's important to keep kind of bringing, you know, those things into policy spaces and policy conversations. So I just wanted to add that in.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think this is a good time also to ask Nidhi about this whole cultural dimension to water bodies. I mean, I think it will be good to wrap it up here and just see how we can really learn from the ground before we make large decisions. And that is more also about, participatory water management, which we call as water governance as well. And I know Eklavya is here, so I really feel tempted to pull him into this conversation because he's been doing a lot of ground work from, as a bottom-up water governance. So would you like to throw some light on this cultural aspect, if it can be, embedded into water governance process, which we are not right now? The cultural has become more recreational as we look at, Haridwar, Rishikesh, Varanasi. The whole cultural dimension is bloated to recreational. Over to you, Nidhi.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I see in our context, water or rivers, I just saw something on Twitter, and I had posted that as saying that rivers for us are not just water bodies. So it's very important for us to understand that for us, river or a pond or a dug well is not just a water body. It is much more than that. There is a huge culture that is attached, and like you would talking about Eklavya is a very dear friend of me. And recently, when we were traveling in Bihar, I could do reportage on floods, Bihar floods also, because he was also there and his team was there. So the thing is with water is also about our culture. And as I think I've traveled around different places, I've realized there is a huge strong culture and heritage with water. Like I remember we went to one of the PVTG village in Jharkhand, and there they have a culture where they brought water in a lota, small lota, and they keep it in front of you. The first thing you do is you just touch that water a little bit and just sprinkle it. Then they start talking to you. Because for them, if you touch their water, there is a friendship that gets formed, and only then they start talking to you. And then, we had a lot of conversation around it. So that's like a very interesting thing of how they look at water. It's forming bonds. Again, in Bihar context, I was speaking to somebody, Ishtiaq Ahmed. He's a researcher based in Patna, and he was telling me about how names of rivers. It's very fascinating. Now, government wants to decide how our rivers will flow, and
yes,
you all know that how Himalayan rivers are, and if Himalayan rivers keep drifting, that's their natural way of flowing. So saying that Nadi gaon mein ghus gayi, that is Nadi's route only. So we have to understand that that is the route of the river, and for centuries, people, at least in that region of North Bihar, have lived with the rivers. They've always lived with the rivers. Like I was reading somewhere that if in Rajasthan, in Jaisalmer, if the temperature crosses 50, 52 degrees Celsius, people do not have air conditioners at their homes, right? And people are still living there. People are still surviving there. Similarly, in North Bihar, people have been living there with the rivers, with the floods for many centuries, because they have evolved with their rivers. They know how to manage their lives with the rivers. But unfortunately, these large engineering solutions that we have brought in have somewhere fractured that relation that people had with their rivers. It is so sad that this time when we were traveling in North Bihar, and we went to one of the villages, Raisa Lota, and it's right next to Gandak, and of course Gandak's water had swollen, it destroyed their standing crop and all. And I generally ask people over there that would you want this river to go away? If it goes away, will it affect you guys? It broke my heart when that woman said this river should just go away. Can you imagine? They talk about Gandak as Gangaji. So when they refer to Ganga, they don't say Gandak. They say Gangaji hamara sab leke chali gayi. But somewhere it is so sad that people actually want these rivers to disappear now. So, which is like a very, very sad and a scary scene, that something like a river with which they have lived for generations, now they want that river to go away. That whole connect of how this river is beneficial for agriculture, how this river is going to bring water in your dug wells and all that has gone. Now, culture aspect, there is one like Bagmati is a river we all know. It comes from Nepal, enters Bihar. And so Ishtiaq Ahmed told me, do you know why Bagmati's name is Bagmati? Because Bag, as in the tiger, never follows the same route. Every time the tiger comes, it takes a different route. Mati in Hindi means buddhi. So this Bagmati has the brain of a tiger, which means वो एक तरह से नहीं चलेगी. It is going to keep
shifting land.
Exactly. So that's its natural way of flowing. So, and you have to let it flow like that. You can't think that if you embank it on both the sides, you are somewhere going to stop its flow or, reduce so-called floods. Similarly, there is another Raksi Zor, another seasonal river he told me, Ishtiaq told me about, is that Raksi Zor is another seasonal river. And that river rarely has water. Only during monsoon it gets little bit of water. And when he said, I asked people that, this river doesn't even have water. Why are you calling it Raksi as in demon? So the people told her throughout the year, she's like this only, dry. Come monsoon, it brings so much of water that its energy, Zor, becomes like a Rakshas. So we call it Rakshasi Zor. So that's how is the character, the charitra of rivers, which people who live along these rivers understand that. And that's how they have learned to live with them. Now, people like us who go from cities, we have a very different idea of river, of, oh my God, North Bihar devastated by floods. Floods are so bad, we have to stop floods from coming in North Bihar. That's what our ideal is, that North Bihar should have no floods. Well, if North Bihar doesn't have any floods, there will be no good silt, there will be no farming, and the cost of production of agriculture in that area will go up very, very high if you don't have the silt coming in there through rivers. So I think it's a lot about our culture, our heritage around rivers, which we don't understand because, we think by studying in big colleges and earning big degrees and all of that, we understand water so much better than these.
No, we don't teach water, Nidhi.
Absolutely.
We don't teach water. I mean, all four of us are not educated in water, but we are learning by learning. So it's bit by bit. So that is very interesting because for a long time, I also knew floods are good, especially in the context of Bihar and most of the regions of India, because it is rain-fed agriculture in India. So floods are required. But what kind of devastation, that's a completely different discussion altogether. Let me just get Sayantan in the discussion here because he's writing something very interesting. Little bit other topic, but doesn't matter because we want to be more inclusive and make the conversation richer. Sayantan, would you like to add your bit? Because I see some interesting points coming up from Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar Islands. And we hardly talk about them. And this is where journalism is very important. We will know as citizens what is going on when journalists are talking about it. How will we come to know? And thanks to all these alternate journalism now, like Scroll, Print, Wire, and all other Mongabe, Third Pole, we get to know a little bit more than our mainstream journalism is telling us. I don't see him unmuting himself. So I really want to take this conversation further. Okay, no issues. We are reading your text. Thank you, Sayantan, for the update. I want to take the issue of the whole idea of biodiversity, because whenever we are talking about water, especially with the ministry and especially all the decision making is happening around water, anthropocentric. So water for people, appropriating, maximizing profit, so on and so forth. But what happens to water for water, water for wildlife, water for birds, water for, fishes? there is not much written about these things. I mean, I would really like you people to take it up. How about Rishika, Vaishnavi? What are your take? Vaishnavi, Rishika? Rishika, I see you unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's a huge lake grassland complex in Bangalore. This is not somewhere outside of Bangalore. This is right in the city. It's called
Yes.
Hesarghata.
Oh,
So
it
Hesarghata
recently
is,
got selected, no, as a wetland just a month ago
yeah,
or so.
it was
Yeah.
declared as a conservation reserve. There was a lot.
Yes,
Uh,
after many years.
it took a lot of time to declare that area as a conservation reserve. So, and I've reported about it. It was not a very good story because the real estate interests are huge on that piece of Bangalore land. The local MLA is also, I mean, I've done like investigative reporting on this based on RTI documents. They lobbied with the then Chief Minister, Yediyurappa. They lobbied with the then Forest Minister, with the then Environment Minister to get on the Wildlife Board and reject this proposal. So there are clear letters written to Yediyurappa, who was then CM and whatever else. But anyway, now it took like 2-3 years to finally declare that as a conservation reserve. But in cities, this is what happens to wetlands. In cities, wetlands, so when you see a wetland, you think, okay, I'll drain it and then it'll be land and then I'll build on it.
Absolutely. That is what is happening.
So real estate interests on wetlands in cities are basically only this. They want to drain it and then it becomes land. Then it becomes land which you can build your commercial plots over. And the battle is even more difficult if you're talking about saving biodiversity, because biodiversity doesn't have a commercial, I mean, you can't put a price on it. So Hesarghata, obviously bird diversity is huge. Many varieties come, but apart from that, some camera traps even found leopards once in a while. This was many
Wow.
years ago. So imagine leopard in like Bangalore city, like it's crazy, right? And there are camera trapped images. It's not anecdotal. There's an actual image. So imagine if you let a city thrive with all of its biodiversity, with its lakes and grasslands, it can be hospitable even if outside in some areas it is completely inhospitable. So Bangalore, everyone knows it as a concretized space, right? But imagine a leopard just walking into these areas and actually staying there for a while. It's a huge deal that even in a hostile city like Bangalore, there can still be small spaces like these which we can share with wildlife also. But I also want to talk a little bit about the riverfront thing, because
Go
the
ahead.
the culture thing is very important, because okay, as an environmental reporter we don't really hear good news very often, but this was one good news I came across when in 2020 the Nashik Municipal Corporation used funds which were meant for riverfront development to actually decommission a riverfront project. This was in Nashik on Godavari.
Hmm.
So Godavari, what happened? They basically made it into a canal. The river bed was concretized, the bank was concretized. So what we should all know is that unlike rivers from the Himalaya, which get glacial melt, rivers elsewhere are sustained by like the groundwater and the springs that are there below the ground. So if you concretize the bed, you are cutting off the river from its water supply, and you concretize the banks also. So both, so laterally and like depth wise, you are completely cutting off the river from being a natural ecosystem. So what happened after this concretization was done a few years later? The river was bone dry. People were parking their cars, like I've seen the image. People were parking their cars in some areas of the river. But what really worked is an NGO which actually values the river for its religious and cultural purposes, religious and cultural heritage. It took up the battle. So there's a local NGO there in Nashik, and I spoke to the person for my report. Anyone can go check the report. This is on Wire Science, and so the springs are basically kund, and that is what comes into and that's where the religious aspect of it comes in, because people who consider those kunds as sacred, they took up the battle because they didn't want to see this religious site die, because that's what happened to it. That cultural link, that religious link to the river, that is what made them take up the battle and finally push the municipal corporation to actually decommission it, deconcretize it. So the concrete was completely removed, and now we have what we had way before, which is a living Godavari river. So yeah, whether it is for people, whether it is for wildlife, like this is city, this is again a city, right? It's a Nashik city. So I think again it goes back to ensuring our cities are livable for everyone.
That is a very important point which you raised, and that also really tempts me to ask my last round of questions, because you said water for everyone or cities for everyone. And whenever we are discussing water matters, I think the discussion can never be complete if we are not talking about the inequity aspect of it. See, when I look at water, I see it in two different ways. So natural disasters, man-made disasters, climate crisis, and crisis which is manufactured and manipulated by our planning and provision process. And I think in there, and Nidhi had touched it in the beginning, but I would like to understand a little bit more about, is it really talked about a lot? I know tanker mafia is talked about, people queue up. I mean, how is this whole inequity issue that the poor and vulnerable, more than half the population in this country, I mean, this is also Niti Aayog's stats, who suffer from lack of access to, good water and for sanitation as well. Is it covered enough? What are your takes about it?
So as far as inequity thing is concerned, I think the way our cities are built, they promote this inequity. If I see Mumbai, the water of Mumbai comes from all these huge lakes that have
Yeah,
been
first is rural urban inequity. Yes.
absolutely. I think
Very well put.
yeah,
Very
yeah,
well
I will
detailed.
always bring that in because I see myself
Yeah,
as
the
a
rural is you mentioned.
living in
Yeah,
an
yeah, the
urban
rural.
city.
Absolutely.
So that inequity is very high because water in Mumbai is coming from some 180 kilometers away, lakes that have been built in Palghar, which is a tribal district. And I often go to Palghar to do reporting. Now, Palghar has a huge issue of water. By
100 kilometers. Go ahead.
by
You had
December, January, most of their water bodies, they just, they go dry because there is a basalt layer underneath. So the water really can't go down. So they have a huge, in January, I had gone to Palghar to do a report on water crisis there, where again you have these tribal women who have to walk so much to fetch water for their families, and all their water from there is brought to Mumbai. So it's like, it is just embarrassing. It is shameful every time I go there because I know I live in Mumbai. The water that I'm getting in my tap is actually their water, which is coming from there. And then what the whole thing is, and still the whatever the appetite of a city is still not satiated because Mumbai is still thinking of some other larger projects with Gujarat to bring water from there, because like Rishika was saying, cities are expanding. There are millions and millions of people living in this city, but that's, we must also remember that uh, cities also have their own water bodies, water sources. Okay, we are completely ignoring them. Like Mumbai has salt pan lands. Of course, I'm not saying you drink water from the salt pans, but Mumbai has salt pan lands. Now that land, government has decided to give it for Dharavi redevelopment. So can you imagine climate change context happening, Mumbai getting flooded so much, sea levels are rising, and you have salt pan lands which actually act as a buffer. These are like the sponges which take care of the excess water during a heavy rainfall event. Government thinks that because you want Dharavi to redevelop some tall building skyscrapers to come up over there, so you want slum people to shift from there and go and live on salt pan lands. It just makes zero sense. So I think the right hand of government doesn't know what the left is doing, especially in the context of climate change. Uh, a city like Bangalore has a community of well diggers, traditional well diggers. People who know Vishwanath, who's based out of Vishwanath, who's based out of Bangalore. They have been working a lot with this traditional community of well diggers, bovies they are called, which were traditionally used to dig wells. They have completely run out of business because you have pipe water supply that has come in and all. But somewhere now this community, which is an urban community, is being roped in. Can we have dug wells, which can we use them for recharging our groundwater? So I think there are huge, for me, if I look at equity issue, I usually look at more from rural urban perspective. To be very honest, I might just be biased there, but maybe Rishika and Vaishnavi can add more to it.
Yeah,
I
within urban also. Go ahead, Vaishnavi, go ahead.
I was saying I completely resonate with what Nidhi was saying. In Delhi, like I've lived in and out of Delhi for the last 10 years, but it was only maybe 5 years ago that I actually visited the floodplain where the Yamuna is. And that's when for the first time I realized that Delhi mein bhi kheti hoti hai. There's also people fishing in Delhi. There's a whole community of fisher folk that do this as a livelihood. Um, and yeah, like all of these places, I think like for me to not know it comes from this from a very urban space where you don't live so close to the Yamuna, you don't realize that there are different communities and livelihoods that are dependent there. But also it is these communities as now, especially in Delhi, there's Mansi, maybe you will be interested. There's a push for a riverfront kind of a infrastructure in Yamuna as well. And it's been talked about a lot. It's a part of Delhi's master plan for 2041. There are a lot of conversations around different kind of development that's supposed to happen on the floodplain. Um, but all of those developments are um, in terms of aesthetics of what a city should look like. It should look beautiful. The riverfront is going to be used by people for walking, for birding, all of that. But when those kind of plans are being made, it is completely robbing other people who had been dependent on this for livelihoods. So the fisher folk that I was talking about, people who are doing farming on the floodplain, they are not part of the plan at all. In fact, like the latest, I think it's only the 2041, the latest master plan. It doesn't even mention fisher folk. They're not at all a part of like the plan. So when this kind of development is happening, all of those people who are dependent they don't even have a say on what this should look like, right? And that is, to me at least, it's a very clear kind of understanding of how inequitable this whole the development would be. Like and already there are so many examples of the Delhi floodplain where a lot of large infrastructure has been made. The Commonwealth Village is based entirely on the floodplain. And when every monsoon it floods, people come.
Akshardham temple also. Akshardham temple also.
Yeah, it's in the same belt. It is built on the floodplain, and every year when floods happen, there people complain कि यहाँ पे water logging हो रहा है. But where else will the river go? It's literally the floodplain. That's what happens every monsoon. That's what's supposed to happen. So if you drive there, like or if you take the metro during June and July, these months, you will see that a lot of people who actually live on the floodplain, they have to kind of rehabilitate towards like on temporary sheds on the road that connects and from Noida side to Delhi side. You will see that. And that's something that happens every year. So it's sad that you this kind of inequity is there, and when these events happen, it's the people who are actually so directly connected to the river that are affected the most. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
Absolutely. You touch a very interesting part where fisher folks are not mentioned. And I say if fishes are not part of the river discussion or policy document, fisher folks are of course out of the discussion or business out of it. What hurts me is that when these riverfronts or water bodies are looked at, we only look at the water part of it, not the ecology part of it. Because I know in Ahmedabad itself, the whole ecology has changed. Fishes are coming from West Bengal, then the bird population has changed, the vegetation has changed. The fishes die very frequently in the riverfront, but still it is, So I have written also actually, by the way, on water grabbing based on Sabarmati's example. So it's extremely important that the grabbing is not only of land and water, but also grabbing the rights of biodiversity, grabbing the rights of poor people. So philosophically, sometimes I'm saying, if we are not caring about other human beings, how will we care about birds, fishes, animals? I mean, they're far. Sabarmati used to flood with cattle. We all want milk. We don't want cattle in the city. That is the paradox or hypocrisy we live with. But I think these discussions are never ending. And now I feel, I should have had just one topic and have you girls for, 3, 4 sessions and we can just cover them. But that's maybe we do it later on
But
also.
the one good
Go ahead.
news from Bangalore is there was a cricket stadium. This is outskirts of Bangalore, this is like Shimoga area. The cricket stadium is fully flooded now, but buffaloes are enjoying it.
You see, I mean, there is a relation that buffaloes, if they are actually bathing in pond, their milk quality is very different than they are like this. But I just don't understand why this basic common sense is missing, and I often link it with the lack of water education. If people like me who have been interested in water for now nearly 30 years, I never got education in water, just trying to learn from all of you with more than 300 sessions. And I'm going to present also the same. Why these conversations are important, because we do not have enough of water education going around. And also, I think that is a basis why it is not even being written enough, why environmental journalism is not a lucrative profession, probably, unless and until people like you who are emotionally driven, or you are leaving some things behind to really take it up. And I'm sure there are a lot of challenges taking it up. And especially when we talk about these exclusive projects, inequity comes very stark on our face. And the more exclusive projects are, they are more excluding. Simply put, if we talk about lakefront development, riverfront development, so it's always there. When I'm talking to all three of you, I now realize why I have been so interested to become journalist all my life, and I could never be one. But you people tempt me and give me more clarity why journalism is such a wonderful profession. But this is also a good time to start slowly wrapping up the session, and I would like to know the challenges that women faces as a environmental journalist. First of all, I'm sure it is a challenging task, whether it is any gender. But then, if there is anything additional that women have to face being in this sector of environment or water journalism. Anyone may start. Nidhi. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the reason when I started off as a journalist 25 years back, at that time, environment was not really a beat. Nobody,
Yes.
it was not a beat at all. And it was laughed upon. If you told somebody I'm an environment
Can
journalist,
relate.
they would say kutta billi reporter hai, ya, aisa.
हाँ.
This is how it was talked about. And it was seen as like a soft beat. So a soft beat should be done by a woman, which is why I think you will see a lot of women journalists. But
Okay.
yeah. It's seen as a soft beat. So soft है तो
हाँ.
पक्षियों के बारे में लिखना है, पेड़ों के बारे में लिखना है, तो महिलाओं को लिखने दीजिए.
No wonder Mother Earth and Mother India.
हाँ. So that
Heroes
kind
are
of thing.
mothers.
But I think it's also now, if I look back, it's also very good that women got to be this beat, because I think women are somewhere also very sensitive towards a lot of things beyond what's just there to cover it. But challenges wise, if I see, I mean, to be very honest, I don't think there is any challenge as such I can mention that, being a woman, I am
Being woman.
face
Okay.
this
But
challenge.
otherwise, in general, environmental journalism, what are the challenges?
No, I think being a woman in this field is actually an additional advantage.
Very good.
Because trust me, because I also, what Rishika was also saying, and I think Vaishnavi also pointed out, that when you start, so when you go to rural India, when you start speaking to women, if you are a male journalist, women do not open up that easily initially. Like, so that's like, it takes time for them to open up. As a woman, it gives me an added advantage. When I walk into a village, I can just sit with a bunch of women and talk to them about almost everything, right from, environment to contraceptives. You can just talk about anything with them. That helps build rapport. And like I think Rishika was saying, then when you speak to women and try and understand a story from an environment on ecological perspective through a woman lens, the story changes completely. It has happened so many times that if I'm working on a story, and if I do a story and then if I speak to say 4 or 5 women, my entire story has changed. So I say women doing environmental journalism is actually an added advantage. I mean, I see it as that.
Okay, wonderful. Rishika?
Yeah. So I completely agree with all that Nidhi has said. So journalism is this strange space where gender is not a barrier. I don't know
Okay.
how it has become like that, but journalism has strangely been open to it. Is there's no gender inequity in that way. So anyone can come in. So with whether so none of, I don't have a journalism background. So but I could still come in as a woman, as an environmental reporter, and still do the reporting. And I completely agree with Nidhi that when I go for a story, when I go to a household, I can first approach the women very easily. Even my instinct, I mean, I would if I would talk to them, and it has changed completely. So I was doing one story, I remember, about firewood and LPG, the switching from firewood to LPG. And the men were talking about how it's a little more expensive now because you have to pay money. Like, even if it is subsidized, you still have to pay a little bit, right? To get the LPG. But the women, all of them who I met, they spoke about how they don't have to go out at 5 a.m. into a forest, face elephants, and come back with a pile of wood, and then again go in the evening again to collect a pile of wood. So for them, it's a huge reduction of hardship. So obviously, the money aspect even they spoke about, because these are not very wealthy households; they are very poor households. So the cost is a drain on the entire household, including the women. But women spoke about how much easier it is now that they don't have to go out twice a day to collect wood from the forest. So the story completely changes. So if I would only go and talk to the men in that village, I would come back saying, okay, no, it's very expensive for them, it's unaffordable, which is true. But also at the same time, it reduces the hardship on the women across the whole. And this is the story everywhere, whether it is about collecting water, what I said, whether it's about collecting firewood. It's entirely on the women. And if you include a woman's voice or many women's voice in your story, the story will change. It's almost guaranteed that the story will change. And as a woman, it's easier for me to get out this perspective because I would instinctively approach them. And as a women journalist also, I like it. So I completely agree with Nidhi. So this is a I like the kind of power it gives me, the kind of space it opens up for me. So yeah, I like environment journalists who are women, and it's a nice space, I think.
Vaishnavi?
Yeah, fully 100% agreed with both of them. I think also, like, when I think back to all the reporting, like Rishika said, like the economic side of things, mostly we'll see men talking about it. Or now when I'm thinking of it, like all the, folklore that I know, or oral histories I know, or people talking about songs that they used to sing, or recipes of food that they used to make, all of that is knowledge that I know from women that I've spoken with on ground. And it often, it interacts really beautifully in the piece. It adds so much value to the piece. Just that relationship of a person with, say, a forest or water, all of that, like all of those relationships that I know it because a woman has told me, in the stories that I've covered. I think the only time I feel like a little bit, I don't know, like the only time I feel it might not be in my favor being a woman is probably like when I'm ground reporting, and like when I'm thinking of like the logistics of my travel and everything. And I've seen like my male colleagues आराम से, हाँ ठीक है, कितने बजे का टिकट है, ले लेंगे, कोई बात नहीं, रह लेंगे जहाँ रहना है. But for me, like at least I'll think twice that, okay, do I know at least one person in this place that I'm going with who I can, like put either my editor or my parents in touch with? Or like, is this a safe time to go? Will I be comfortable? Is this a safe hotel? Will the door be able to get locked from the inside? Like, these are just like things that I know that I think additionally about, which I have seen like my male colleagues not really caring about. So maybe that's probably the only thing I can think of as an additional challenge. But no, otherwise, I think like both of them have said, it's actually a great value. It adds great value being a journalist who's a woman and reporting on these issues. It just gives more easy and access to speak with the people we want to.
No, I completely agree with what Vaishnavi is pointing out, because yes, somewhere that challenge we face, because a lot of time when we are also traveling to hinterlands, where you may not have a good safe hotel or something like that. I remember there are so many times during field work you leave your hotel at like 8 in the morning and you come back only at 8 at night in the night, and there is no place, no toilet when you're in the hinterland. So it's like you don't drink water throughout the day, because like it just happened with me when I was traveling in Bihar recently.
It's in every sector.
Don't have water because you are worried that there are no toilets. So from morning till evening, you are like that. So I think somewhere it's not good for our health, to be very honest, to not be able to do. So those are a little bit of challenges of safety and all you definitely face, at least initial years. Then after some time, I think you kind of get used to that, handling that kind of thing. But yes, that is a challenge. I agree with Vaishnavi. I've had nights at hotel where I slept with the lights on initial, 2-3 years of my traveling, because I used to be scared of sleeping alone in a hotel in some weird block of this country. But then slowly you kind of get over your fears.
That is also, thank you so much to bring this out, because that is an issue which actually pops up not only in journalism but also in water sector. We are running a series on women for water. We are also running a series on women in architecture, and this comes out very, very common remark as in terms of safety. But that speaks a lot about a society or a country where we know that a developed society or a country is one where women and water are healthy, happy, safe, and they can move freely without fear. And we have had this culture in the past. Both women and water are revered and referred as equivalent to God. So we are still referring women and water equivalent to God, but with the changing time and culture, this diminishing reverence for both are putting us into really serious threat of a dignified living. And I'm referring to both women and water in this case. And I mean, you both, you all three pointed out this in a brief note here as challenge. But time is really ticking, and we have to take a call to call it off for the day. But before I do that, first of all, I would like to thank all the participants who are on Zoom, and also I see quite a few of them on YouTube, for your constant support and encouragement to make these water conversations meaningful, and also helping us reach and cross 300 sessions. We are actually around 320 sessions old now. And that is also making us the longest water conversations. Deep gratitude to all of you. We may have continued this for sake of conversation, but I know now we are really making a deep impact into connecting these water enthusiasts, people who are concerned about water. So initially it was just conversation, but now it is also a deep concern and also deep connection between each one of you. Then deep gratitude to all these three girls who opened their heart out here, and also really started motivating me again to think about doing a little bit of writing more, and also learning from them how to write and how to investigate the whole journalistic way of writing things, because I think journalism is a very crucial medium to change the society in a way we would like it to be. What you people show and society reads or learns from you is also what they perceive and prefer, what they want from the society. So this is where I think our role of journalists are very crucial in the way we are heading towards in the society, whether it is ecology, economy, or whatever it is. So thank you so much, Nidhi, Vaishnavi, and Rishika, for this wonderful conversation. I know you have a lot to offer, but 1 hour, and we have crossed that 1 hour, 15 minutes, to be honest. That's quite a good time to have this discussion. But before I let all of you go, I would also like to announce that this Friday Waters, we are having a session on Meet a Maestro on September 25 at 5 p.m. IST. That's our routine time to discuss with Padma Shri, Professor Pradeep Thalappil from IIT Madras, and he's going to have a very interesting discussion on can water droplets make soil. The next week, Wednesdays for Water session is after Diwali. So we are taking one Wednesday off. We usually do 4 Wednesdays a month. So this time we have 5 Wednesdays. So we straight away go to November 6th, when we have guests from International Water Association, the largest water association in the world, where we will have officials to talk about water and wastewater management and get a global perspective about it. That's on 6th November at 5 p.m. IST. And we shall continue our Monday munching and musing with Women for Water as we do on every Mondays, which is more one-to-one discussion with women in the water sector. Do keep checking our social media accounts and website, www.w4w.in, for regular updates. And a special news for all of you on 26th of October, this 26th of October, 2 days after now, I'm going to present what is this W4W Foundation in my first TEDx talk at Suchitra Academy, Hyderabad. Thanks once again to all of you. Do take care of yourself, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.